Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor, Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
This recording takes place online in the era of safe physical distancing. Our featured guest today is Christopher Paul Curtis. It has been 25 years since Christopher Paul Curtis first earned a Newbery Honor, as well as an honor from the Coretta Scott King Book Awards for The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, his critically acclaimed debut novel, which was subsequently adapted for a Hallmark TV movie. In 2000, he became the first African-American man to win the Newbery Medal for his 1999 novel, Bud Not Buddy, which also received the Coretta Scott King Award. His books, Bucking the Sarge, 2004, Mr. Chickee's Funny Money, 2005, Mr. Chickee's Messy Mission, 2007, Elijah of Buxton, 2007, which also received a Newbery Honor and a Coretta Scott King Honor, The Mighty Miss Malone of 2012, The Madman of Piney Woods, 2014, and The Journey of Little Charlie, 2018, which was a finalist for the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. His books regularly appear on lists of the best children's books of the year. And in 2013, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963 was named one of the New York Public Library's 100 great children's books of the last 100 years. Born in Flint, Michigan, Mr. Curtis has resided in Windsor and Detroit, and in his free time, he enjoys reading, playing basketball, and collecting music. Thank you for joining us, Christopher Paul Curtis.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you've had a prolific and very successful career as a writer of children's literature. What were the children's books that you found most inspiring when you were growing up?
I think that's one of the things that turned me into a writer of books for young people. There were none. I was not a book reader when I was younger. I'd read comic books, I'd read newspapers, magazines, anything, but very rarely would I read a book. And I was a really good reader. In 6th grade, I was reading at a 12th grade level, but for some reason, books didn't grab me. And I think part of the problem was finding books that were for, by, or about people like me. And that's not to say that Black children should read Black books and white children, white books, and Asian children, Asian books. It's just that you want to see some type of representation of yourself when you're reading. And I've been around a lot of kids who are real bookworms and really into it. And I think to get to that point where you're really into it, there has to be something that you can relate to closely, something that relates to you closely. So I was not a big reader of books when I was a child. I can remember reading Johnny Tremaine, the books that they'd make you read in school. I didn't really discover the power of books. I was probably in 11th grade, and I was in a math class. And for some reason, I was sitting at the back of the class, and I'd been reading this book, Bridges of Toko-Ri by James Michener. And that was the first book that really got me. I was sitting at the back of class, pretending I was doing work, and I'm reading. And then I started crying, and the teacher said, "Mr. Curtis, what's wrong with you?" And I said, "Nothing. I just, something I ate, I guess." But I had never really, and it surprised me. I'd never known that a book could make you cry like that.
It's amazing. So that was your start in reading. Where did you make that transition to writing? When did you first fall in love with writing?
I always liked to write. I enjoyed writing. I never had this drive to be a writer. It didn't seem like that was something that was a practical profession to have. And I can remember my earliest memory of wanting to be a writer. I can remember telling my brothers and sisters, I said, one day I'm going to write a book and everybody's going to read it. And the reason it's so stuck in my memory is the laughter that brought from them and the derisiveness. I thought, okay, that's out. But I think that I worked in a car factory in Flint, Michigan for 13 years. And my friend and I had a job where we doubled up, which meant that we were supposed to do every other door, put every other door on a car. We decided to do 30 minutes of each. That way you had a 30-minute period to sit down and do whatever you wanted to do. And I found out, I started reading, and then I found out that if I started writing, it made time go by really quickly. And so I'd go and I'd write every day. And I wasn't writing fiction. I was just writing really what was going on in the factory, things that I was feeling. And I hated the factory. You have no idea how much I hated being in that factory. And that was a real respite for me. I really started associating that with something good, doing the writing. And I think it was important for me because it also kind of taught me patience. Because as I would write and things weren't going the way I wanted them to, I'd sit down, write, and I'd get up and I'd work. And while I was working, I'd be thinking about how to say it in another way or how to say it differently. And that's really how I started to write. That's where I made the transition from being a writer. And it was really reading bad books in the factory. I'd read a book and I'd say, oh, that's miserable. And I'd say to myself, I can write something better than that. And finally got the courage to try to do it.
Well, you've talked a little bit about how you carved out a writing routine when you first got started. What kind of routine do you follow now? How do you carve out time in all the other kinds of things that go on in your day?
Originally, I would start when I left the factory and I was doing a lot of menial jobs, and I would have time to write during the day. Then I decided to take a year off work. I didn't work for a year, and I'd go to the public library, the Windsor Public Library, and I would sit there and write. And I looked at it as a job, and I said to myself, this is a job. This is not a vacation. You have to do it. So my writing practice then was to go early in the morning. I'd be the first one in the library. I'd sit, I found the place that was most, comforting for me, or the place that I felt most comfortable writing was in the children's section. I'd sit there and I'd write every day. Come rain or shine, I'd be there writing. Did that for a year, came up with the book. And then after the book was published and I was writing at the library, I started knowing too many people, and I was not writing. I was doing more talking than writing. And so I finally decided, okay, I'm gonna start writing at the University of Windsor Library. And I went to the University of Windsor Library and I'd write there. And for a while I was doing that, maybe 3 or 4 hours a day in the morning. And then I'd go play basketball, and then I'd come back and do it more. But then some of the students found out that I was a writer, and I started helping people with papers. And that was so hard. So I finally started going to Tim Hortons, and I learned to buy a big set of headphones. I put on the big set of headphones, and what I would do is, from working in the factory, I just naturally now get up every morning at 5 o'clock. And then as I'm getting older and I found out I'm getting earlier and earlier. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up, I want to write. Tim Hortons was the only place that would be open. So I'd go to the Tim Hortons and I'd sit there and write until the kids had to go to school, come take the kids to school, then go back and maybe write some more, maybe not.
Do you work on several projects at once, or do you tend to work on one project exclusively at a time?
This is an instance of where people tell you things and you let it get in your mind. When I wrote The Watsons Go to Birmingham, I was also working on Mr. Chickee's Funny Money, and I would jump in between the two with no problems. And I was talking to somebody, they said, what, you work on more than one at a time? How can you do that? Don't you get things? And I thought, well, wait a minute. And then so that I stopped doing that, and now I just work on one thing at a time. When I do, my process is I don't outline. I go and I just let the story write it. To begin, I start with a conversation between maybe myself and another character, or two characters that are going to be in the story, just a conversation. And then it's a matter of recording their conversation. And as the book goes on and I get more control of the book, then I don't have to go through the conversation part. So I sit right down and start writing and start telling this story. And one of the great things about writing is a lot of times the story doesn't go where you want it to go. It goes where it wants to go. So there've been a lot of instances where I've written something and then gone back and it just didn't seem right. And then I realized I wasn't listening to the voices. I was letting Christopher tell the story instead of the characters.
Very fascinating. So as we mentioned in the introduction, it has been 25 years since your debut novel, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, made the Newbery Honors list, received honors from the Coretta Scott King Book Awards, and was included on several lists of the best children's book of the year. It's a book that has continued to be loved and celebrated by young readers, librarians, educators, others for 25 years now. So what do you think about that book at this point? When you think about how that book has been received and all the kids who have read it, what are your feelings about the book?
My feelings have evolved really about The Watsons Go to Birmingham. When I first wrote it and it was published, I was thrilled because I finally had something that was published and that was at libraries and bookstores. Then as time went by and I do a lot of speaking, I used to do a lot of speeches at schools, and I'd go talk to the kids and I talk to teachers, and the teachers would say, it's really been a great way for us to introduce different kinds of subjects to the students. And I started to it's not that I didn't ever always take it seriously, but I started taking it more seriously and looking at it as an opportunity and a platform really to be able to discuss things. And I'm so glad that my books are in schools because that means that so many young people are growing up with them. And especially with readers, a lot of readers are really hungry to take different things in and to try to make it a part of their own fabric that they can use the things that they learn as you write about them. So I'm very, very grateful that I took the chance to write The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and it's my favorite because it's because of that book that I don't work in a factory anymore. Largely, I think that's the reason it's my favorite. But no, I take my responsibility very seriously. I think that I have a lot of ears, a lot of people that listen to what I write and read what I write. So I'm conscious of that. Maybe that's why I'm slowing down. I'm not writing as much as I used to, and I think. I'm overthinking things at times, and I've got to get that out of my mind. Like I've been working on this book I'm doing now. It's called The Sanctuary Sessions, and it takes place in Flint, Michigan, back in the 1960s, late 1960s, and it's about a little boy who's 10 years old, and his grandfather is a veteran of the Korean War, and they've got this 1953 Buick Skylark in the garage in the back, and they go in there and they talk, and it's about life in Flint at that time. It's based on my childhood. I lived in an all-black neighborhood in Flint, and completely. We hear about the southern cities in the United States being so segregated, but the truth is the northern cities are much more segregated than the southern cities. Flint, Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, these are the cities with most of the segregation where it takes place. Mm-hmm. And I lived in an all-black neighborhood, and there are advantages in that too, in that I had all the examples of the people that I would see, the professionals, the people that were successful were Black people. So, I grew up with didn't have the concept that, this is not something that you can do. And my parents really stressed that with us, that you can do anything. If you want to, and you put your mind to it, you can do anything. So I started to write about this new book is about that, and how during the 1960s, one of the big things was urban renewal, where they would bring an expressway and they would just tear whole neighborhoods out. And coincidentally, the neighborhoods were always Black neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So, and I didn't really know what an effect that had on me until after they had started to tear the neighborhood down, and I'd come back. I was working at a grocery store that was a ways from the neighborhood, And after work one day, I walked over to the old neighborhood, saw the house, and it's a feeling that's hard to describe when you see just everything. It looked like a bomb had been dropped. I couldn't recognize places at first. I had to try to figure out where on the streets I was. And it really just, I realized that had a big impact on me. And so that's what this story is about.
Much of your work involves telling the stories of individuals, families, and communities of African descent, whether in the US or here in Canada. Is that simply a matter of writing about the communities you know, as you mentioned, you're basing your next book on? Or do you feel inspired to be a chronicler of Black lives specifically?
No. One of the reasons I think the books are so successful, The Watsons Go to Birmingham and Bud Not Buddy, is that even though The Watsons Go to Birmingham takes place during the Civil Rights era and Bud Not Buddy takes place during the Great Depression, they're not stories about the Great Depression as such and the Civil Rights era. They're stories about families. They're stories about people. And I don't approach it as I'm trying to teach anybody a lesson or whatever. I'm just chronicling one family's, usually one child's reaction to the larger world around them. And I think that makes the books universal. And what I love to hear when I go places is Asian kids or white kids or Black kids or any Hispanics will come to me and say, it was like you were in my closet listening to me and my brother talk. And I think that's that's the highest compliment I can get, because we're more alike than we are different. And I think the fact that we keep stressing the differences is detrimental. It's important that our stories are told. And I think it's important that I tell the story from the perspective of a Black world. One of the things when I first started writing, when I was writing The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and I sent it into my editor, and she said, okay, well, you're talking to the teacher, but you don't identify the teacher as Black. You don't say a Black teacher. And then I very patient, I said, that's because it's a Black child talking. A Black child would not identify another person as a Black person. That's a person. And if I'm not identifying the race, that means that that's a Black person talking to a Black person. Like when white people talk, they don't say, well, this white guy came up to me, and so but that's and that's the kind of thing you have to be aware of when you're writing too.
Well, you mentioned that we have more in common than we have differences, and you and I have some things in common. You've lived in Flint, Michigan, Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, as have I. So you are a transnational creature.
Lived in Flint, Michigan?
I did. I'm a Flintstone. Yep.
No, you're not.
I am. Indeed. Yeah, I grew up there. Yep.
Where do you live?
I grew up in Durand, but my first job as a teenager was at WJRT TV.
Oh, yeah, right on Lapeer Road.
That's right.
Actually, gonna have to sit down when we have a Flintstone talk.
Yeah, I think so. We're gonna have to catch up. So anyway, but the question we were getting to was, so you were a transnational creature of the Detroit River borderlands. To what extent has that geography had an impact on your writing or on the stories that you choose to tell?
Ooh, a large impact, I think, because it's not so much in the writing, but in the way I look at things. Because, and often I look out and I'm looking at Detroit right this minute. I can look over these houses behind me here and it's Detroit. And it's a world away. It's a completely different world. Detroit, Flint, all the states, the cities over in the States and in Canada, completely different worlds. With guns, with the violence, the difference in the death tolls from crime in the cities, and a lot of it has to do with guns. And then when you look at with the reaction to the coronavirus, how poorly it was handled there, and I think what it has done is made me have a realization that we are a lot alike, but it's a lot of things that are over us that make the difference. It's the governments, the way the people look at their own stories, the way the people feel about themselves. So I don't think it's had a real difference other than dramatic effect. Like, you know, what is more dramatic than you cross that river and you're free? You know, that to me is just that. As I was writing the books about Buxton, Elijah of Buxton and all, and as I would do research, I kept saying to myself, I hope nobody else is doing this. There's so many stories here that I want to write about. And, you know, I want to get this out before anybody else does. And it's just a geographical border. And it makes all the difference in the world, right, in so many ways. Canada has a lot of problems. Canada has a lot of racial problems. And in some ways, Canada is at a disadvantage because I don't think, while the United States knows they have a problem, I don't think it is as well known in Canada or as much accepted in Canada that there is a problem. And it's improved in the 30-some years I've been here. I know when I first moved to Windsor in the 1980s, I was stopped by the police so many times. I couldn't believe it. There was apparently someone who looked a great deal like me, who was robbing convenience stores all the time. And they'd stop me. I said, why'd you pull me over? Well, we had a description. You fit this description of somebody who robbed the store. And, you know, and this went on for years. I don't know why they didn't catch this guy. I mean, he, I don't know what was the deal with that, but that has changed. And I don't know if the being international has played any role in my writing, really, other than the stories, you know, the Windsor or the Buxton Windsor stories and the Flint and Michigan stories. But I think it's had an effect on me. And I think that is, as a writer, the things that affect me come out in my writing, I believe.
As a Black lifelong Windsorite, other than university, I'm going to hazard a guess that it was not one person they were chasing. You fit the description of everybody because you were a Black man. Anyway, you told us a bit about your next project, and that sounds very exciting. I'm wondering about sort of the incubation period of your typical projects. Like, how far in advance do these characters and these conversations appear to you before they start to be transformed into the actual novel that we end up seeing?
Well, I have an idea, and I have an idea where the story is going to go. I just don't know how we're going to get there, what the method is that we're going to get there. So that's the whole journey. So a lot of times it doesn't work out. Like one of the things I wanted to write about was the water system in Flint with the lead in the water. You know, just a natural story for me. I thought it'd be very easy to do, but once I started doing research on it, the thing that really I realized I can't do this was there was a woman that I interviewed that had twin boys, identical twin boys, and they were 7 or 8 at the time, I think. And one was about 8 inches shorter than the other. And lead, you know, it was the responsibility of the lead. It was just, and I'm thinking, you know, this is something that's just going to be brushed under the table. Nothing is going to happen from this, or, you know, they might pay, but I think about people living in Flint and living, not knowing what effect this has had on your children, and it might show up years later. So, and I'm sorry, Irene, I've gotten away from what your question was.
So the incubation period for one of your novels, generally.
It depends on how much I am into it too. Like Elijah of Buxton was the shortest one I had, and it was about 6 months, which is extremely fast for me. And it came, and I wrote it, and that was it. And others don't come that quickly. It's usually a year to write the story. And then, of course, there's research and all beforehand. But once I start to really sit down and get it, and once I get the character, and I was telling you about how I have the part where it's just a conversation. What I had done, what I learned through just happenstance, I learned that the best way for me is to get the story rolling and then go from there. So as I learned that I write, and whatever comes to my mind, I put it down. It doesn't matter if I'm writing the Watsons Go to Birmingham and a spaceship comes and picks up the Watsons and takes them there. And I'm thinking, that's not, but I write it down and I have a period. That's what I do during the day. And then when I wake up early in the morning, that was my editorial period. And I know I've got the story when the editorial period, when I'm cutting out the things that I know aren't going to be in the story, when that almost goes to nothing and then just the creative part stays, I know I've got the story then. And that's the only time that I know I've got the story. But I think about it, and it's what I tell young people. One of the things I tell young people when they ask about writer's block, and I first say, don't fall into that trap. I don't believe in writer's block. There's something wrong with the story. It's not a case of there's something in your head. Set it aside, let it go. Things will come to you. And I had done that with the Watsons Go to Birmingham, which was a story originally called The Watsons Go to Florida in 1963. And the family got to Florida. It was a good story. They got to Florida. Nothing happened. So I set it aside. And then I came across the poem Ballad of Birmingham by Dudley Randall, who was a Detroit poet, about the bombing of the church in Birmingham. And what struck me particularly about his poem, The Ballad of Birmingham, was the shoe. One of the shoes of one of the little girls was a Buster Brown shoe, and the discovery of that shoe. And that, I realized that was the Watsons needed to go to Birmingham. So I start the process and you get the ball rolling, and it's almost like things that you need are attracted to you, and you know you're on the right path if you're getting these inputs and all.
Thing that's come up in my mind is your books are enjoyable for adults to read. And I don't have kids, so I know they're enjoyable for me. And obviously they're enjoyable for kids. Is part of your editorial process evaluating what your book is doing in terms of vocabulary and reading level? Do you think about that a lot, or do you kind of leave that to your editors?
Oh, my editors would not allow that to be left to them. No, that's something that I have to do. I have discovered the way I do it is, all right, I'm usually writing in the voice of a 10-year-old, 12-year-old child. First thing I do, I write it in the voice of Christopher Curtis, whatever age I am at that time, 60-some-year-old man. I write it in that voice. And then it's a process of that editorial part. I have to catch the narrator's voice, and I start to fashion it into the narrator's voice. And then eventually the writing, once I grab a hold of that, then the writing comes to me in that voice. It can change, but I try to stay with that voice throughout because that's the story, the narrator's story to be told that way.
One more quick follow-up. You also write in a lot of different time periods. How does that impact the way you approach voice?
My research is largely designed to catch the way people speak. The way we speak today is not the way we're speaking 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, on back. And you have to try to catch the vernacular, the rhythm of the speech. There's a lot of different things. And I found that one of the really great ways to learn the way people talk is through music. And someone said that all writers are frustrated musicians. And I believe it. I'm a frustrated musician. So when I listen to these things, I hear the way they're said, and you can pick up the language that way. So largely that's what I'm looking for when I'm doing research for books that take place back in the 1800s. Of course, you don't have the recordings of the voices and things. So literature takes the place, and I read a lot of books from the era. I just try to get a hold of the way people sound. And once I get that, I don't think we're that much different here in 2021 than people were in 1921, 1821. There were some differences, but I think basically the human core is still the same now as it was then.
That's a really interesting point that you make. I mean, in terms of the eras and the way that speech changes depending on the era. You've captured African-American dialect in a very sensible and sensitive way with respect to 19th century speech. And I know sometimes when we're looking at historical documents or the way that our ancestors' voices were transcribed, it can be somewhat insulting because the people transcribing the language were white folks and were, you know, building in certain stereotypes as they were transcribing the voices, even if they were abolitionists or whatever. So I wondered how you worked around that in finding the right voice and the right tone for these 19th century Black characters.
As I said, I don't think we've changed that much. And my thing is, and what you said is exactly right, Irene. A lot of the slave narratives, for example, are written by well-meaning abolitionists who were white and would often translate what they felt like the person was saying, or would use their tilt to whatever the conversation was about to try to make it look like something, to make it something that would support their point of view. As I said, well-meaning people doing this. But if you look beyond that, you know, you can still see the humanity of who the person is. And that's what I try to do. I try to grab hold of a human being and squeeze out what I think that a human being would react to these things, not to, and when I read slave narratives, it's not so much, I can't get the voice from that because as you said, it's not written by this, but I can get details. You know, there are some details in there. And Zora Neale Hurston did a lot of transcriptions of Southern poor Black people back in the 1930s. And this is about as close as you're going to get to slavery. I mean, even though the laws as if slavery's been passed, it really had, slavery's been abolished. It really hadn't been. It changed it had a different mask on, but it was still there. And she's a much more reliable translator. Even then, she had problems because her publishers wanted it done a certain way, and she fought not to have it done that way, to do it the way that she felt like it should be. And she had problems with men too, with so many, even at that time, African-American men were not exactly welcoming to her and treated her very poorly. But on my computer at home, I've got right up in the upper left-hand corner, I've got an autograph of Zora Neale Hurston's. It's not a real autograph. It's something that I bought a doll. They had a Zora Neale Hurston doll, and they had an imitation of her signature. And I've taped that up on my thing, and I think about her a lot as I write.
We'd love to hear, hear you read. Would you like to read something for our listeners?
Sure. What I would like to read is, this is the 25th anniversary of the Watsons Go to Birmingham. When they showed me the cover, I thought, what? Isn't that supposed to be a celebration or something? You just got a green cover on here. But I've grown to like this. And
it's what they do with
what
classics.
I would like to read, thank you, is, and this is very relevant today with what's going on. Here, let me read it, and then I'll talk about it. Many heroic people died in the struggle for civil rights. Many others were injured or arrested or lost their homes or businesses. It is almost impossible to imagine the courage of the first African-American children who walked into segregated schools, or the strengths of their parents who permitted them to face this hatred and violence that awaited them. They did it in the name of the movement, in the quest for freedom. These people are the true American heroes. They are the boys and girls, the women and men who have seen that things are wrong and have not been afraid to ask, why can't we change this? These are the people who believe that as long as one person is being treated unfairly, we all are. These are our heroes, and they still walk among us today. One of them may be sitting next to you as you read this, or standing in the next room making your dinner, or waiting for you to come outside and play. One of them may be you. And I think that I really kind of lost faith in people because during the 1960s in the United States, in Flint, was a time when there was real courage and real heroism shown by people, by white people, by Black people. There was a young man from our neighborhood who became one of the freedom riders. And he come over to my parents' house and was talking to them about it. And my mother was begging him, don't go down there. You know, why would you want to do that? But he felt like he had to do it, and he did it, and he went down there. And there was a spirit really that seemed to be alive in young people at that time. And many people gave their lives, and many white people. Viola Liuzzo from Detroit went down there and was murdered during the Freedom rides. And that courage and as I said, I've been kind of disappointed and kind of become kind of cynical. But then what has happened lately with the Black Lives Movement has kind of reinvigorated my spirit for humanity, because I hadn't seen, it's been so long since I've seen demonstrations where you have young white kids and young Black kids together doing something, working for something. And it looks, I looked over to Detroit now, and I'm not sure why, but it looks a lot brighter over there. This past week, I've been looking over the river. So who knows, maybe things have changed, and maybe we'll be smart enough to follow these young people's ideas and to try to lift ourselves out of this mess we're all in. And this goes across, back to you said about borders, Kim, this goes across all the borders and everything. I'm hoping that this is a new spirit that has come, and that we can all, do better. We just have to do better. And I don't want to get on a soapbox, but yeah, I'm feeling much more optimistic now.
Well, what a great conversation this has been. Thank you so much for joining us, Christopher Paul Curtis, and congratulations on your big anniversary.
Thank you very much. I can't believe it's been 25 years. I don't know where the time is going. It goes by fast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.